Hey, this is Jack with ReciPal, and today we're going to talk about common issues with recipe yields and how you can fix them. Your recipe yield is just a comparison of the weight of the inputs of your recipe, the ingredients, to the weight of the output of your recipe, the final product. So if the total weight of your ingredients is 5 pounds and the weight of your final product is also 5 pounds, then you have 100% yield. But if the weight of your ingredients is 5 pounds and the weight of your final product is 4 pounds, then you have an 80% yield. In a lot of cases, your yield is expected to be below 100%. And this is for two main reasons: waste and moisture loss. Waste is any ingredients that don't make their way into the final product. So if we were making cookies and some of the batter gets left behind in the bowl, that would be considered waste. Now, moisture loss accounts for what happens through the process of cooking. So for instance, if we were to cook those cookies and some of the water evaporates, they would be lighter after the cooking process, and that's moisture loss. Now, there's no right answer for what your recipe yield should be. However, in ReciPal, if it's outside our expected range, we'll highlight it in red. For us, that's anything lower than 70% or higher than 100% yield. So here's what to do if your yield seems too low for the recipe. First thing to check for is if you accidentally put in any duplicate ingredients. Within ReciPal, you'll get a notification if you add the same ingredient twice, but if you add a slight variation, maybe you were experimenting and forgot to remove the old version, you just want to check out that you're not adding any additional ingredients that don't need to go into the recipe. So check for duplicate ingredients. The second thing you want to do is to take a look at the type of units you're using for your ingredients. If the units are a volume measure, say a cup, it can range widely depending on the type of volume measure you use. So for instance, for powdered sugar, you could choose a cup that is sifted or unsifted, and those will each have different weights to it. You can choose volume measures that are chopped finely or coarsely, and again, it will affect the weight and that will affect your yield. And the last thing to do, and something that you can really do in any case when you're curious about yields or something seems off, is put everything on the scales. Just actually weigh the ingredients and weigh the final product. Sometimes there's something off in the measurement and the scale will not steer you wrong. If your yield is over 100%, then you definitely want to double check that you accounted for everything accurately. Now, without breaking any laws of physics, it's kind of hard to have a yield that's more than 100%. That means the weight of the output is greater than the weight of the inputs, right? But there are some cases where this can actually happen. Ice cream is a weird example. It's measured in volume. We buy it by the pint, right? But the volume of the end product can actually be greater than the volume of the ingredient because air is added while it's churned. This process is called overrun. It's the amount of additional volume that's added through air, which it kind of acts as like an invisible ingredient. Now, if you're not making a product like ice cream where you're adding air, which is increasing the volume, which is the way that the product is measured, then you really, really want to be careful if your yield is over 100%. Probably something's going wrong. And here's the things that you can look at if you have a yield that seems too high. The first thing you want to look at is that all of the ingredients are accounted for. The number one ingredient that gets missed is water. For some reason, we seem to just take this for granted and forget to put it into our recipe. But you also have to make sure you include any ingredients that are used as part of the cooking process. So if you use oil to cook, that needs to go in there too. Now, oil is a good example because not all of that oil probably makes its way into the final product. So this is a case where you would add the ingredient and use a waste percentage to account for the portion that doesn't make it into the final product. A second thing to look out for is just to make sure you're not rounding up. If your recipe makes 4.5 packages, don't round that up to 5. It does not have to be a whole number, and rounding up will throw off your yield. And the last thing to look out for is the distinction between volume and weight when it comes to your packaging. Now, some people assume that because they're using a 2-ounce bottle to put their seasoning blend in, that the weight of their seasoning blend will be 2 ounces. But in these cases, it's a volume measure that the bottle's referring to, and the weight will vary depending on the product that's put inside of it. I know this sounds super obvious and straightforward, but it's often overlooked. So a couple good examples to illustrate this are the spices you might buy from a store like Trader Joe's. They all use the same exact bottle, but every single one has a different weight. Another example people will recognize is honey. It's often sold in a bottle that's shaped like a bear, and it weighs 12 ounces. Now, that is the weight of the honey in that specific bottle, because the volume of that bottle is just 8 ounces. So if you were to put a different ingredient inside, a different final product, the weight could be very different. Recipe yields are pretty straightforward, but it's easy to make mistakes if there's typos, missing ingredients, or inaccurate units. It's also really important to pay attention to the difference between weight measures and volume measures, because this is the number one place we see things sort of go astray. The ReciPal platform tries to clue you in when something seems off, but at the end of the day, you need to make sure everything passes your own sense check. If something does seem off, a few quick measurements can normally solve the problem.